The Russian Empire in the early 1900s was one of the most powerful nations on Earth, but Russia had some pretty big problems. The working class was just really not happy at all. Russia was far behind Western Europe when it comes to general societal advancements. The economy was struggling. Really nothing was going great in Russia. One of Russia's bigger problems was the fact that almost all of their ports would freeze over in the winter. It was very apparent that Russia needed a warm port on the Pacific Ocean along with somewhere to set up a base to grow its navy. The Korean and Liaodong peninsulas fit this criteria perfectly, and Tsar Nicholas II knew it. So basically Russia just took the city of Port Arthur and set up shop there. The Qing dynasty wasn't very happy about this but eventually just leased the port to Russia. Japan grew weary of Russian influence in northern China ever since Russia backed the Qing dynasty in the Sino-Japanese War in 1895. Japan wanted to get ahead of Russia's aggressive military history by offering Russia Manchuria if Russia allowed Japan to keep its presence in the Korean peninsula. Russia didn't approve of this offer and demanded that Japan gave Russia everything north of the 39th parallel. Japan gave up on any form of diplomacy after Russia's demands, and decided to go to war with Russia with a surprise attack on the Russian Far East Fleet at Port Arthur. This attack severely damaged 3 of Russia's largest vessels, and I'm not even going to try to get the AI to pronounce their names. The force behind the Japanese attack made the Russians decide not to go into a complete naval battle, and the Japanese failed to form a blockade, so some ships tried to make an escape. The 2 Russian vessels that avoided the Japanese didn't leave Port Arthur clean. Both ships hit mines on their way out of Port Arthur and one of the ships sunk, while the other sustained heavy damage. The Battle of Port Arthur saw over 20,000 troops from both sides die. With the Battle of Liaoyang, by the end of 1904, Japan had literally destroyed Russia's entire Pacific Fleet. Russian Major General Anatoly Stessel surrendered Port Arthur to the Japanese. This decision was ruled to be treason by the Russian government, but he was pardoned eventually. In 1905, the Russian Navy was nearly obliterated in the Battle of the Yellow Sea, so Russia sent reinforcements from the Baltic Fleet. Yes, you heard that right, Russia was sending reinforcements from the Baltic Fleet to fight in the Pacific. The Baltic Fleet's journey to fight the Japanese is incredible. The crew on the vessels in the Baltic Fleet were conscripts and had little to no training. So as soon as the voyage began, the flagship crashed into the shoreline and then a vessel just rammed into another Russian ship. So they had to return to port for repairs. The crews were very frightened at the beginning of the journey. They worried that a Japanese torpedo boat would sneak up on them and destroy their fleet. But, at this time the Baltic Fleet was still in the Baltic Sea. The sailors thought that the Japanese were over 5,000 miles off the coast of Japan to ambush them in the Sound. So naturally, when a small fishing vessel nears the fleet, all of the ships fire at the ship to blow it to smithereens. Luckily for the fishermen, the guns on the Russian vessels are pathetic, so they survive. Eventually the Baltic Fleet made it out of the Baltic Sea to nearby Britain and saw a few ships ahead of them. And just like any sane fleet, they fired every gun they had at them. This chaos lasted 20 minutes until they realized they were shooting at fishermen again. They also managed to fire at one of their own vessels, killing 2 Russian men. One of them was a priest. They somehow managed to damage 2 of their ships and only sink 1 British fishing vessel. This came to be known as the Doggerbank Incident, and it almost caused the UK to declare war on Russia, but instead they denied Russia's access to the Suez Canal, which meant they now had to go around the entirety of the African continent to get to the Japanese. This portion of their journey saw them attacking more civilian ships, but they needed to refuel, so they stopped near some German vessels and they gave them coal. The Russians simply dumped the coal on deck, and eventually some Russian soldiers literally died from black lung due to the coal just laying around near the crews. The fleet stopped at Madagascar to pick up some pets for the crew to boost morale. They ended up bringing a crocodile, snake, and various other animals you wouldn't want on a naval vessel. On a particular ceremony to send off one of the many sailors that died from illness during the journey, one of the vessels shot off a gun salute, and they weren't firing blanks, so it hit one of the nearby Russian vessels. The Baltic Fleet now nears Japan, and the admiral realized that he forgot to train the crews. And they did some practice on a target, and instead of hitting the target, they hit the vessel that was towing the target. Soon, the Baltic Fleet is in the Tsushima Strait and near a Japanese vessel, and the fleet mistakenly thinks it's Russian and attempts to communicate with it. This alerts the Japanese and causes the Battle of Tsushima, which results in a massive Russian defeat with over 4,000 dead and nearly 8,000 captured. Only around 100 Japanese died. This decisive Japanese victory completely ended the war with the Treaty of Portsmouth in New Hampshire, which was mediated by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, who later won a Nobel Peace Prize for his role in this treaty. Roosevelt agreed with Tsar Nicholas II with his refusal to pay indemnities to Japan. The treaty stated that Russia was to leave Manchuria and recognize Japanese authority in Korea, which Korea would be annexed by Japan only 5 years later. This war is often called World War I, due to it setting the framework for World War I. Russia's defeat in this war would eventually cause many revolts leading to the Russian Revolution of 1917.